So let's talk about carrying capacity. This is one of several videos that I'm making about population ecology, so make sure you check them all out. So this one, the syllabus objective here, is to explain how the carrying capacity of an ecosystem can be impacted by changes to the biotic and abiotic factors, including climatic events. So first of all, we need to define carrying capacity. Interestingly, it has the letter K, which is particularly interesting, I think. Okay. So firstly, we need to define carrying capacity, which is given the letter K. Carrying capacity is the size of the population. So we're talking about the population of an individual species. The size of the population that can be supported indefinitely on the available resources and services of that ecosystem. So when we're talking about resources, we might be talking about food, or it might be about real estate, shelter, like it might be like a rocky substrate, or it might be amount of soil, amount of light or water, etc. But services are things like being able to remove waste from the ecosystem so it doesn't sort of accumulate. So we can see that we start with an exponential growth if there hasn't been a population there before, and and there's no density dependent factors that are limiting resources and services. We see a rapid population increase, but then it slows as we reach the carrying capacity, when density dependent factors start to become an issue. And then you can see we oscillate around this thing called the carrying capacity. So the shape of this growth curve is an S shape, or a logistic curve. So it's rapid and then it slows. Now we've talked about this in terms of K strategists. The reason they're called K strategists is because K is the letter we use for the carrying capacity. So K strategists are those ones that tend to oscillate, their population tends to oscillate around the carrying capacity and have a stable population. So, but this syllabus objective is actually looking at those factors that can impact the carrying capacity. So I guess they're those factors that actually make that population oscillate around the carrying capacity. I've already introduced this idea of density dependent factors. So what do I mean by density dependent? Okay, so if you have a look at these two squares down here, each one of these dots is to indicate an individual in that species, in that population. Let's just say, for example, we're talking about space or shelter. There's a limited amount available, and it's just this box here. So as we increase the population, because it can't spread out in this particular situation, the density increases. Now, when we've got an increased density, we tend to have density-dependent factors that can limit that population growth. So the availability of food, the introduction of predators. So a higher density is going to be more attractive to predators. Parasites and disease can spread much more readily when there's less space between the organisms. And then there becomes a competition for intra-specific competition, so competition within the organisms of this species, but also perhaps competition with other species as well. All of these things are the biotic factors, and they're just some examples. Abiotic factors might include the accumulation of toxic waste. So those services, the ecosystem services, can no longer keep up with removing the waste, etc. Like your decomposers, for example. The amount of space and shelter. Like for example, it's a rock wall with a cliff face with barnacles, for example. It gets to a point where there's no more space. There's no more shelter. Light is an abiotic factor that can be affected in, say, a rainforest. There's competition for light. There might be the amount of water that's available might be a limiting factor. For example, so water and soil nutrients might be an issue for plants, but equally water might be a problem for animals as well. So all of these are density dependent factors in that as the density of the population increases, these become more of an issue. So what we tend to see is that the population fluctuates around this set point of carrying capacity in a negative feedback loop, which I think is really clever, an ecological homeostasis. So as the population increases over this carrying capacity, well then the density dependent factors become more of an issue. So some of the population either has to leave or dies. So then the population decreases, so the density dependent issues are not as large. So then the population can creep up again, and it tends to oscillate around that. But there's also factors that can actually reduce this carrying capacity, reduce the ability it might be able to form a new carrying capacity at a higher or a lower level. Let's have a look at those. Here's an example here where population of deer actually reduced their own carrying capacity. So there was a carrying capacity for deer that could be supported by this. Then we had an increase in the deer abundance greater than that, and it was actually that population of deer that actually damaged the habitat such that the carrying capacity decreased. So they might have, pulled out all of the trees such that there wasn't enough food, and because those plants were removed whole. So it might be that they've destroyed the trees and the plants, or it might be that they've actually caused erosion of the soil, so the plants and the trees can't no longer grow there. So the population of the deer have actually decreased the carrying capacity. See how it has actually reached carrying capacity again. However, it's at a lower level. Just a note here, we would normally draw the carrying capacity through the middle of the oscillations, okay, because, but that's, So we would normally draw the carrying capacity through the middle of the oscillations because that's that ecosystem or ecological homeostasis. So let's look at other factors that can affect carrying capacity. And these are probably factors that are not normally density dependent, like climatic events. If a bushfire went through, or a flood, or it may actually destroy habitat, so it could reduce the amount of shelter or amount of substrate, amount of soil. So let's have a look at other factors that can affect carrying capacity, including climatic events. So something like a bushfire can go through and remove habitat. It can also remove food. Equally same with a flood. A drought, again, can reduce the amount of food and the amount of water that's available. And a cyclone. So these, what they might do, even if it's just temporarily, they actually reduce the carrying capacity, reduce the ability for that area, that habitat, to be able to carry that particular species. So the carrying capacity, whilst it may achieve a new carrying capacity, so it's oscillating around this point, it's actually at a lower population. Now, don't forget, this can also happen, you can imagine this could also happen with human events. So humans like tearing down forests and clearing land, to make new houses, to make roads, to make dams, to make shopping centres, etc. So it's about habitat destruction. And so if there's reduced habitat, there's going to be reduced carrying capacity. And it could be that they put a road or a highway through. We've actually got fragmentation of the habitat as well. So these are examples of human events and climatic events that actually can reduce the carrying capacity. So it's no longer oscillating around a carrying capacity. The actual carrying capacity has reduced.